You are now listening to the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network.
Welcome back to Wildside, the official Mondo Macabro podcast. Once again, I am Ryan Verrill and joined here with Chris Haskell. Chris, it's been 1 month since we launched the Mondo Macabro podcast, and I am excited to get into our first catalog deep dive. How you been?
Dude, I'm so good, and I want to thank a lot of people who listened to episode 1. Holy moly. Like, the numbers for that, I'm just so excited about. There seemed to be a need for this. I hope people listen to this one as well. And I'm super grateful. Like, it just really kind of blew up.
Yeah, it's been exciting to see. A lot of people responded on social media to our post about it, to Mondo Macabro's post about it. And it's an exciting time to love Mondo Macabro. I mean, next month we've got the Halloween sale coming up. We're going to have a lot more to talk about. Yep. Pretty soon coming up on this show, we're going to have an interview with Pete Toombs. We got some deep dives on some other catalog titles that we'll be going into. But tonight, we're going to be covering 2 films that we brought up last month. Hopefully, you have either seen them if you wanted to before we talked about them, or maybe this will entice you to watch them or seek them out, or even just crack them open if they've been on your shelf and you haven't watched them yet. One thing that we didn't decide beforehand, and maybe this is slightly awkward to do on microphone, but are we going to be sharing spoilers on these, Chris? Because I almost feel like, especially for the fan, you kind of have to.
So here's I was just trying to think of how to phrase that. So yeah, let's just figure it out on air. Because of all the movies we're going to talk about, possibly in Mondo Macabro's catalog, like, watch the fan before you hear our discussion on it. Just because I do want to talk about spoilers, you have to. But yeah, I also really want people to experience this movie before hearing about it, because that tone change in the third act is just, I don't know if I've ever seen, I haven't seen a lot like it.
Yeah, a lot of people call it a slow burn, but it's very different than that. We'll break it down when we get into it, of course. Yeah. But we're going to be talking about those in just a minute. Other Mondo Macabro exciting news: there is some orders going to be shipping out soon for the latest pre-order. Yep. We've got that October sale. We are going to be seeing some other hints and teases coming up, but keep in mind there is a big pre-order coming out in October. Stuff will be on sale, and if you're excited about the stuff we're talking about, make sure you check out the sale that is going to be going on around then. Jared had hinted it will likely be closer to Halloween itself this year rather than like the week leading up to it. They're literally the best prices that you're going to find on all of these. And just a heads up, we're going to do our best to cover the ones that are in print with Mondo Macabro. We don't necessarily want people to feel pressured to go spend $150 on a limited Blu-ray that was out years ago or anything. There's not a ton of things that have gone out of print, but keep in mind, Jared is great about being transparent about that, and there's more and more stuff going out of print lately. So that is something to keep an eye on if there's something that you are interested in. If you want it, the sale might be the best time to pick it up.
Yeah, and they do have the standard blue cases, but as we all know, or as most people probably that know you and I would also know, they don't have a lifetime license on all of these. I mean, they might have it on some of them, but typically these licenses come with a 7 or a 10-year window. So it would be natural for them to license out over time as well. I don't have a good gauge for when all that is, but if you don't care about the red cases, you can still get the blue cases, and a lot of them are in stock, but certainly some aren't.
Yeah, and Mondo's done a really great job about keeping these in print as long as possible. Yeah. To kind of break into what we're talking about tonight already, one of the titles we're going to talk about is Lady Terminator, and this DVD, in 2 weeks after this goes live, will be celebrating its 20-year anniversary of being in print from Mondo Macabro. And we'll talk about it, I'm sure, but it still looks great. It's not going to be putting down a DVD. It looks fantastic for what it is. And even the fan, that is the original red case drop was 9.5 years ago. And you can still buy the standard Blu-ray. It is a really great time to love some of these titles. So we're going to break them down. You want to go with Lady Terminator tonight first there, Chris?
Yeah, let's ease into this conversation here, right?
Yeah, I didn't want to bring the mood down immediately, but Lady Terminator. Just reading off some of the information on the back of the DVD case. This is an Indonesian film from 1988. And the synopsis here says, "Get ready for a wild ride. A sexually rapacious Asian goddess known as the Queen of the South Sea possesses the body of a young female skin diver. Armed with an AK-47 and an endless supply of bullets, this murderous Lady Terminator takes to the streets on a revenge-filled rampage." Chris, what can you tell us about Lady Terminator?
Well, anybody that listened to the first episode knows that Jared and I were geeking out about Indonesia for a while. And, this is one of those movies when you hear about Indonesian cinema, this is always one of the first ones that comes up, right? But first of all, most people don't know anything, which is totally fair. But if they do know, this is usually one of the first ones that comes up.
Right.
And this is like, it's just designed to be a party movie. Like,
Yep.
This is like, just from beginning to end, it just gets weirder. And if you don't know anything about Indonesian mysticism, like everything feels random. And we'll get into that a little bit tonight, or we'll get into that while we're recording around some of the context of that, which I think is helpful. I wouldn't say to enjoy the movie, certainly not to enjoy. I don't think it matters, but I find it interesting to understand the movie a bit better.
Yeah.
But there's a really, really good documentary on this disc that gets into Indonesian exploitation cinema, and it's cool because something that Jared said last time, right? There's not millions of critics about Indonesian cinema, so the fact they were able to get that documentary with filmmakers, actors, critics, it's a great intro, I think, to Indonesian cinema. So another reason to pick up a disc that's like, what is it, like $12 or $9? I mean, it's almost nothing on the website, so it's an easy.
It's 15 now. It'll be even less during the sale. That's the best part.
Get it during the sale. Yeah, exactly.
And it's been around for 20 years. Like I said earlier, I'll get into it slightly now, but for a DVD that was released by a boutique company in 2004, literally September of 2004,
Wow.
This movie still looks great on DVD. Yeah. This is a lot better than a studio spitting out DVDs. One example that I've used for DVDs that look really bad is somewhere around this time, actually, Disney put out a DVD of Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. And if you go to watch that on a modern TV in 2024, it looks like hot ass garbage. It is awful. But if I put in Lady Terminator, you see a lot of hot ass, and it looks fantastic. This transfer on this, it has aged very well. I know a lot of people have asked about Blu-ray on this. I don't know what the current situation with that is, but honestly, it's not something that should dissuade you from purchasing it, because this movie, at the price that it is now, 20 years later, is absolutely worth the pickup, even on DVD. Don't be elitist about the format on this one.
No, it's true. I mean, the only thing is probably worth mentioning, and I hate to even say it, but it doesn't have subtitles, which is a little bit of a bummer.
Yeah.
But I just I did miss some dialogue because I just can't blast movies in my little house. But I caught most of it. There's certainly enough to catch. But it's a no-brainer. Do you remember your history with Lady Terminator as far as like when you saw it and sort of?
Yeah, I don't remember the exact date, but I believe I originally picked this up on DVD around when I was first getting into some of these more boutique pickups, which at this point is just over a decade ago. So somewhere around 2013 or 14. Saw it then for the first time. I had just moved to Kansas City with my wife, and I watched it and instantly just fascinated. This movie does not start in a way that lets you off the hook early. It is hilarious and fun and just completely bonkers from moment one, basically. And it looks gorgeous. So I grew an affinity for it. I've watched it probably 4 times-ish years. And a funny thing, this last month when I was watching it again for this was the first time my wife actually sat down and watched it with me. And man, was she laughing. The dub on this is good, but she was making fun of some of the dubbing voice actors not quite matching up with the personality of what was on the screen. But had to explain some of the history of that, and she seemed to really enjoy it. I spoilers for my opinion, I guess. I love this movie. I think it is one of the best in the Mondo Macabro catalog, and very different from the other stuff. A lot of the other ones are, I don't want to say they're not fun, but this is like probably their genuine most fun, outright fun title that they've put out.
It has some enemies, but for your height only might compete.
Touche.
but yeah, this is really fun.
Forgot about that one for a moment.
Well, you probably didn't see it.
Well, I always looked over it. That's the problem. Height jokes when you're 6'5".
Makes more sense for you. Yeah, I'm closer to the height of the real actor, so it doesn't matter. I did not see this in Indonesia. In fact, it's interesting because I don't want to like get into the background before we talk about the movie, but there's a lot of mysticism in this, and it's kind of centered around this idea of the Queen of the Southern Sea, which is a super old folktale, and it has roots in like all of Asia. Like the Queen of the South Sea is sort of an Indonesian one, but if you take a step back and look at sort of how it's represented visually and in theater and in it's common throughout all of Southeast Asia. So I certainly have seen they do a lot of puppet work and like a lot of puppet shows with this character represented, obviously different than here. It's not a Terminator always, but the basic concept of a woman that's like sort of in control of the seas and can take over people's bodies and is, a lot of the stuff that's in here. So I had seen a lot of plays and productions, I guess, in Indonesia, living there. So it was kind of fun when I did get to see this movie years later, to kind of like, I'm not going to say it's immediately recognizable as the story that I saw, but sort of kind of feel like, okay, that's interesting what they're doing there. And yeah, it just instantly became a favorite. I mean, I probably, when I was in college, I probably saw this 5 times and showing different people and inviting people over. And, it's one of those movies you're like, what the fuck? And then, yeah, anyways, it's always going to be a favorite. I was happy you chose it.
Yeah, I'm really glad that we paired these two together because canonically, it really is one of the earliest DVDs from Mondo Macabro, and it's one of the earliest Blu-rays from Mondo Macabro, and they are they are diametrically opposite ends of the spectrum for tone and feeling of what you're going to walk away from these movies and think about for the next couple hours. Right. But as you'll hear, as we really dive into these, they are both absolutely worth a pickup. So, Lady Terminator, why don't you break down the story a little bit for us and what we see in some of that mysticism?
Sure. Breaking down the story of Lady Terminator. Okay, so there's a little independent film that came out, like a regional sort of fantasy science fiction film that came out called The Terminator, starring a bodybuilder. Some people might know it on the podcast. It got a little bit of attention internationally and did well in international markets, okay in the States. And that caused a bunch of spin-offs, right? So that's sort of like a lot of genre filmmakers from countries that were trying to figure out what audiences from their own country were going to see. Were like, okay, let's make Aliens, but in the Philippines, right? Or like, let's make, Jaws, but in Italy or whatever, right? And so in this whole boom came, let's make Terminator, but in Indonesia. And in that, there's this interesting thing for a lot of Indonesian entertainment where they really try to weave in a story that feels like nationalistic in a way. And that's, I'm not going to say it's controlled, but let's just say it's encouraged. Like there's a specific reason why if anybody that wants to import a US or European movie, had to during the 80s, sorry, I should say 80s and 90s, had to also then make a movie locally. So this company, I believe this is Rapi Films. I believe. Apologies if I'm wrong, but this company that kind of produced this movie, they wanted to import films into Indonesia, so they had to go make movies, and this was one of the films that came out of there. And it's, I mean, it's hardly recognizable as the Terminator. Essentially, what they took from the Terminator was, let's make a human that's not impacted by bullets,
that walks up naked on a beach.
that walks up naked. Yes, that's true. It's introduced as nude and goes into bars at times and gets in fights in bars at times.
Oh, and wears leather.
And wears leather. But I mean, that's kind of it, right?
Yeah.
Really what this is it's a story of the Queen of the South Sea, which is, in Indonesian folklore, is a story that people can take a lot of liberty with and do, but there's a few things that are like consistent in all of them. So like one interesting thing is in this movie, there's a scene where the lady Terminator goes and meditates in a building, in a specific room that has a painting of the Queen of the South Sea. Now, for us, that just seems like a really random scene, and the security guards are like, "How'd she get in?" And they're like trying to figure it out. But for Indonesians, they would recognize that because that's an actual hotel that anybody can go to, and that's an actual room in that hotel that's specifically designed for protection.
Interesting.
Yeah. So like there's all this Indonesian stuff like woven in to a story that's barely the Terminator. But it feels like a story of a woman who's a kind of like queen of the South Sea, or this, figure who's out for revenge, who's going to then go and is difficult to kill and has to be killed through, sort of mysticism, right?
Yeah. This is definitely worth some of that culture understanding for sure, to keep it in a light that makes sense. And in these earlier scenes, really want to highlight the way that they set this character up full on in the opening, which this movie starts with somebody in this very exotic looking room,
Sure.
full blown having sex. And suddenly the woman who is on top and the man who is on bottom are shocked for a moment, and then the man is covered in blood, and it immediately becomes a pattern of this happening over and over and over again. And there is so much that if you've not understood any of this Indonesian culture side of this, it seems just so odd. Not even, 4 minutes into this movie, it's great.
So that's probably, so I wanted to start kind of academically, and then we can go into the fun part, because this movie is not academic in feel or tone. Right. So I guess I should have, one of the things I love so much about this movie is that, for a reason that I can't quite figure out, this woman, the lady Terminator, loves having sex. Like, she loves sex. And she has a particular type of snake or like vermin or some kind of worm or something that lives in her vagina that chomps off the dicks of anybody that has sex with her. So what a great premise for a movie. Like, what a great premise for a horror movie.
Yes, absolutely worth it.
And they all get bloody.
Very
bloody. No, go ahead.
No, just very bloody. That's the best part. It's not just like a slight amount of blood. They did not hold back. And in some of these movies, they definitely held back. This one, they were just like, yeah, let's go all in. In more ways than one.
And all the men are portrayed. I'm just trying to think if it's true for all. There's one kind of hero guy, I guess, and his team of mercenaries that we'll talk about, I'm sure, in a second. But outside of that team of mercenaries, all men are like total idiots. That and granted, she's the most beautiful woman in history, I guess, is kind of the idea. Like no men can, like no men can, what's the word? Uh, reject her charm. Like as soon as she kind of winks at you, like
Right.
you're all in and your clothes are flying off, right? So that's kind of the setup. But like all the men are just total idiots and rude and offensive, and so you kind of don't feel bad for any of them. As she's just ceremoniously, just chomping through cock.
Well, and that is best exemplified by the previously mentioned beach scene, because there are two guys sitting on the beach when she walks up naked. There was no reason to have sex and kill both of those men, but they're both dispatched quite quickly.
I mean, they immediately say yes, and they're gone within what 20 seconds. Maybe. Yeah. The only thing I didn't understand is it seems to be there's this, and I've never understood this. There's this central theme of her essentially chasing one particular woman,
Right.
who's a pop singer, and there's a fantastic middle song that's like super catchy. It's a great earworm. Great little catch of 80s pop. But I never quite understood exactly why she's chasing her. Because that's the whole thing of the movie is like, is that alien that lives inside the birth canal, is it trying to make her the next Lady Terminator? Because maybe it's not happy that it's inside of a white girl. It wants to be inside of an Indonesian woman. Like, I couldn't figure out what's going on.
That absolutely could be, and especially how on the back of the disc here, they say it's like Kill Bill, but with oodles of sex. And of course, with Kill Bill, they're going after one person. They're going after Bill. So
True.
It would make sense if they were going after this pop star, which also, I, for some reason, until this very moment, did not put together that we have two films centered around somebody chasing after a pop star.
This should be called the perils of fame or something. Holy cow, what a funny pairing. Yeah, you're so right.
With this movie, lots of nudity, lots of blood, lots of Indonesian mysticism. One thing we haven't covered yet is after about the halfway point, it takes a pretty stark turn, not into serious, but into almost being a very different type of movie. For the first half, it's more like supernatural horror focused, and then halfway through, suddenly it's, oh, wait, we forgot. This movie has to have an action hero, and there's guns chase scenes going down the highway, which shockingly well done in a film like this. I would have expected quite a bit worse, but man, they filmed the hell out of those scenes.
He did direct the hell out of that. That's right. Yeah, that's true. Speaking of that, the thing I was laughing about watching it was how many bullets do you have to use to realize that bullets don't work on her? Because how long is the movie? 90 minutes, right? Like basically 90 minutes.
Yeah.
And like for 45 of those minutes, they're shooting her and she's not dying. You're like, at some point, try something else, man.
Yeah, it's pretty funny how impervious she is, but overall, it's a blast. Really good ending, I'd say, for a movie like this. It seemed to be pretty well thought out. But overall, just great performances throughout. I love that this is in the Mondo Macabro catalog. Highly recommend it for everybody. I'd love to go into more detail, but honestly, this one's pretty straightforward and just overall fun, but you are the Indonesian expert. What else can you tell us about it?
Does it pass the Bechdel test before I answer that?
Ooh. I don't think it does.
No? Okay. But please leave a note in the comments if it passes the Bechdel test or not. Maybe you and I aren't the best to determine that. I mean, she is empowered. This could be considered a feminist metaphor.
Yeah, absolutely.
The phallus in the film has no power.
In fact, it's kind of the opposite.
Yeah.
It's not even no power. It's like negative power
Yeah.
because you're going to die.
This is like, this metaphorically, this is like what, Kegels could be amplified up to like the extreme.
See, and okay, a small rant here. I was super excited way back in, I think it was 2007, to see that there was a movie coming out called Teeth about vagina dentata. And in that movie, there's like next to no exploitation. There's like one good scene in the
I
dentist
know.
scene where something happens, and man, or maybe it's not a dentist, maybe it's just a regular doctor, but that movie, you could have went so much further into the horror side of things. But this kind of like leans into what it could have been. It is exploitative. There's lots of nudity, lots of blood, and it's vagina chewing penis good throughout this entire movie.
Yeah, no, I was just trying to look up really fast while you were talking. I didn't get there in time. But there's a movie in the like 60s or 70s. It was I'll have to find it here. But there's a movie that's about a ravenous vagina, and it's a very specific theme. It's much heavier on the metaphor, I would say, much more focused on the feminist component of that. Anyways, but that would be an interesting like triple feature. But
yeah,
there's not 100 movies with, what'd you say, vagina
dentata is what they called it in Teeth.
Dentata. Yeah, it's not 100 movies with that.
But the fact that there's a couple, even, that's interesting.
Yeah. I won't. The biggest thing, I mean, like mysticism wise, the biggest thing is that like for an Indonesian person, they would recognize this as a story of the Queen of the South Sea way before the Terminator. And I think, according to that documentary and just reading up on an article that has some really interesting interviews and history on this, that was very intentional. Kind of like they wanted, because the studio was forced to make a movie in order to acquire some other films, they wanted to make a movie that would be well received and like, stay in theaters and stuff. And it was, so they just felt like this would be a great pair between the Terminator and this, ancient myth that goes back as far as stories go in that Southeast Asia. Typically this is represented. So the snake, I guess, that sort of like lives inside of her, is not represented as a snake that lives inside of a woman. It's typically a separate creature. And the interesting thing is it's the head of a woman, more like kind of, I guess, closer to like a Medusa style woman. It's not represented as like beauty. It's represented as sort of this like more of like, if you would think of traditionally like what a witch or like what a Medusa or like, one of those type of the way that women are portrayed, more like that. And then the spine and like the guts and the entrails are represented in a lot of the images below the head. So there's no body on this creature, on this particular being. It's the head, and then it's like the entrails. And typically, if they're performing it live, like in a show, it's a mask that's put on, and it's, unless you know what you're looking at, they kind of hide it with like feathers, and it's a little difficult to tell exactly what you're looking at. It doesn't look like an intestine and a stomach and a heart and all that stuff. But, and if you look back into like ancient art that's done and stuff, you can see it's more, they're trying to kind of recreate the human body and entrails and stuff. So, there's, I don't want to go too deep into it. I'm by no means a scholar, but I just think that like the basic concept is that the woman who lives in the South Sea protects the area, and she has the ability to take over a body as needed as part of her powers. And so that is like, that is common. There's a thing in the movie that's interesting. So the opening sequence is this beautiful Indonesian woman in like a veil, like you can see through kind of like a scarf that she's wearing. She's sitting on top of a dude. And this guy, she says, he tricks her basically. And he pulls out the snake from her vagina dentata. he pulls it out and turns it into like a sword somehow. And that becomes important to the plot later. But she says, in 100 years, I'm going to kill your grandma. I think
Something
the
like
dub
that.
was off.
Yeah.
I mean, so you know what they're talking about. But they didn't really. The funny thing, I was kind of laughing this time seeing through because they never referenced that guy again. It wasn't like that this young woman who was an archaeologist was like a descendant of that guy. You kind of assume because they're both white, I guess, but there's no like connection to it actually.
Yeah. Yeah, this one gets interesting. I would love to know more about this, but again, one of the things that we mentioned up top in our first episode is how hard it is to get experts on Indonesian cinema. I was just helping with another disc for another company, and it is crazy. Like trying to find somebody that knows anything about the history of some of these films on a scholarly level is rather difficult. But thankfully, this disc from Mondo Macabro, like Chris mentioned earlier, has a documentary on this that is covering all of Indonesian exploitation. It is, gosh, I can't, is it almost half an hour? I think somewhere around there.
Oh yeah. I mean, they talk about the warrior. They talk about the what is it? Queen with the black mask, whatever that is. I mean, they talk about several different films from different studios, and it's pretty comprehensive. Yeah, so
it's definitely worth watching, and again, it makes this DVD absolutely still worth pickup. And this definitely is the best way to watch this film that I know of. I think the earlier releases of this put it in a weird aspect ratio, cut off some of the film, and had some other problems with it. But this, for 2024 standards for a DVD, looks pretty fantastic and
absolutely
fully worth your time. Hard endorsement for me, and I believe Chris would say the same.
I just hope whatever mystical forces are keeping this from coming out on Blu-ray, I hope those are resolved so we can get a subtitle track and new archival interviews and like all the stuff that you would hope to see with this. Because there's a guy now named Joko Anwar who is this amazing ambassador of Indonesian cinema.
Yeah.
And he's a huge nerd. And we spoke about him in the first episode even. Yeah, he was on the Warrior disc. He's this fantastic ambassador. And like, you know, hearing him talk about Lady Terminator would be super fun. So
on that note, would you like to travel to West Germany in 1982?
Oh my God. It's time. We should.
Okay, so The Fan, this Blu-ray from Mondo Macabro, like I mentioned earlier, the red case Blu-ray was released in March of 2015. We are at 9.5 years ago on this one. This is, like I just said, from West Germany, 1982, directed by Eckhard Schmidt. It says, teenager Simone appears to be like any other young pop fan, but soon her fixation on the band's lead singer R takes over her life. She walks out of school, breaks off with her friends and parents, and somehow finds herself waiting for her idol as he appears on a TV show. Simone wants nothing more than to love and be loved by R, but he uses her with machine-like coldness. When he walks out on her to join his friends, she plots her revenge. I'm gonna stop there. The rest of the synopsis gets a little into spoiler. We're gonna cover some of that, but like Chris said, this is a movie you should pretty much just go into fairly cold. We're going to spoil it from here on out, so if you want to check out of this and go watch it before you finish, please do. The Fan, let's get some first impression thoughts on you on this one.
How do you even talk about The Fan? Like, you know, the funny thing is, this is not, this is the first time I'd seen it. Maybe this was the first time I'd seen it. I can't remember. Maybe the second time. But there was a lot in the beginning that I had forgotten. I mean, I can't remember, but I was impressed with, you know, to be fair to the filmmakers, this is a very tightly controlled, well-made movie. And I'm so glad it is, because it would take an extremely competent director and writer to pull off something that I could even sit through without turning it off with some of the problematic material in the film.
Right.
I hate underage nudity in movies. I was very open when I was going through the Fun City editions. I hate watching Bilitis as much as I like Fun City.
Right.
I was very, very uncomfortable watching it here. there, I'm not going to sugarcoat that. Like, I hate it, and
Yep.
I hate that they use girls in that way, especially in Europe, is where like the worst offenders of it in the 70s and 80s. But this is a great movie. I mean, it's a well-made, great movie. Yeah. What are your first impressions?
I will say on the underage nudity thing is definitely a problem, but other than that, Desiree, I believe it's pronounced Nosebush, the star of this, is excellent throughout this entire movie in a way that is, I don't even know the best way to say this. Like, she is cold but realistic as a very fanatic driven teenager. Essentially, she is somebody that clearly is able to focus in a way that really needed to be conveyed.
Absolutely.
And this character throughout this film goes through a couple different journeys. I think it is a very interesting idea for a film, and the third act that we're going to go into in just a minute, of course, is chilling. This movie is so much crazier than you expect it to be at the very beginning, especially because it sort of like welcomes you in with this almost like cloudy and ethereal type of filmmaking. Like, there's this very welcoming 80s stylistic like soft aura around everything. And so it feels very like music video, which obviously they're sort of going for here. And then, man, by the end of this, you are taken completely off guard. But let's break down some of that plot. So she's going through this movie, and she is a fanatic, to say the least. She's sending letters. She is waiting by the mailbox every day, expecting letters, and disappointed when they don't show up. Any of those earlier scenes really take you off guard that you want to highlight?
You know, it's funny watching it. There's a relationship she builds with the postal worker.
Yeah.
Because she's constantly waiting for letters. So she's writing all these letters to her hero, whose name is R, right? He just goes by R. And she's writing all these letters to him, and she's at the postman, I guess, every day. And they start to develop a relationship that felt a little bit like Steve Buscemi and Scarlett Johansson in Ghost World. Like, just in terms of kind of being inappropriate, but also innocent at the same time. I think that was actually handled really well, because I was curious what he would. I thought he was going to take advantage of her, because he was certainly into her.
Yeah.
So that was a scene that jumped out to me early on. What about you?
I the fact that you have to look at this in the lens of it was made in West Germany, definitely in a divided time. There is a lot of thoughts throughout this that is clearly looking down on capitalism. It is definitely looking at like the marketing aspect and making sure that somebody is being spoon-fed a character essentially through the music industry. And eventually, when she's waiting outside this TV station, what really got me is that scene. You can feel the change. Like, I don't know, something about the first, 40% of the movie, it feels very innocent until that moment where you have to go, oh wait, she's clearly a little crazy, and up till now it's felt innocent, but there's a chance she might actually be about to meet this person.
Right.
And at that point, you can feel like the tonal shift and the colors start to get slightly different. And you can feel her go from this very depressed person who is unable to, face the reality of what's going on, to suddenly having basically every dream fulfilled. And of course, us knowing what we know, not even necessarily about the end of the film, but about these relationships, how they don't necessarily go the way everybody wants. You know that this is about to get real bad. So it's weird knowing that and watching her tone change from so negative that she's like almost suicidal to somebody that is, oh my gosh, this is the best moment of my life, in the just quickest snapping of your fingers.
I'm so glad you called out her acting because there are very few adults that could pull off what she's able to pull off in this. Because honestly, like if you were to take a step back and think of like Fatal Attraction or something, like I don't know, there's a couple of 1 Hour Photo comes to mind. There's a couple of movies
Yeah.
about like obsession, right? Peeping Tom is probably in the conversation. There's a couple of movies just about like obsession.
De Palma made 3 of them.
That's true. But like to do it from the perspective of I don't know, 16 or 17-year-old, and to have it still carry the weight that it does and
Yeah.
work as a film and a metaphor and a, like, I guess on a practical and a literary level is kind of what I'm trying to say. Shows a level of writing, acting, directing, scene building, world building, everything that is. I honestly like. I think this is a great movie. It's a simple one, and the director was part of something called the New Munich Group, which I don't really know what that means, but it was like I guess it was a group of filmmakers that were trying to do something maybe similar to Dogma 95 from the Von Trier. Like, I don't know. It felt like they were trying to kind of make a movement. They were called the German New Wave.
Yeah.
So they were all trying to make a statement. And, I wish there was an underage nudity in it. I hate that. And especially because it's not just like in there, but it's like, they really celebrate her body, and it's really hard to watch. I really don't like it. And I don't know what else. It just sucks. I wish it wasn't in there, especially for like 20 minutes. But to be fair as well and balanced, like it's a hell of a movie. Like it's really well directed.
Yeah. One thing that, before we get into the ending of this, a very interesting pairing that I've not watched these back to back in one night or anything, but I feel like if you were to watch a doubleheader fairly often, it would be rather interesting to watch I Think We're Alone Now. Take a 10-minute intermission and then go watch The Fan and see this dire fanaticism played out on an adult level. And I Think We're Alone Now turned into, you take a breather and then watch The Fan and end on a real downer of a note after that. These situations are to be taken seriously. I mean, in the last 10 years, we've had a pop star get shot in Florida by somebody that was a fanatic. And it's something that absolutely is important to keep an eye on. I mean, this year alone, we've had, not to make it all about current events necessarily, but Chappell Roan has exploded as a pop artist, and she's had to come out and make a lot of statements saying like, hey, people are weird finding where my parents live and coming up to their house and demanding pictures, and shit like that is not okay. And so many people feel entitled to certain things based on these situations, and this movie absolutely called it way before it was a bigger problem like it is nowadays. And with the internet, I can't imagine what they could have done with the frightening aspects of this film in 1982 if the internet was as prolific as it is now.
I'm going to lovingly challenge what you just said. Because this was made in 1982, right?
Yeah.
I wonder if the Beatles and Michael Jackson would have had a similar stories.
I'm sure they did, yeah.
Because I don't, back then, the one thing that's changed, I fully agree with everything you've said about Chaperone, and that's all. I'm just wondering kind of like when it started, because, I don't know if we'll ever, I mean, Taylor Swift is very popular and she's possibly influencing elections. I mean, we'll see, right? But like, though that level of popularity is pretty rare.
Right.
And the Beatles had it, Elvis had it, Michael Jackson had it. I don't know. Maybe Madonna briefly, but not quite to the same level.
Surely not claiming that they forecasted that as saying it never happened before. I guess what I was saying is the tragic side of it.
Yeah. Like, it's an interesting angle to take on celebrity, right? Of basically, like you said, to your point, I mean, they kind of called it, because right now with keyboard warriors, there's a lot of threats. Like, with the downside of social media is that everybody has a platform now, so every voice is sort of equalized, which I guess a pure anarchist would love. But it does come with problems.
There is a real possibility that this was influenced by the death of John Lennon. That happened 2 years before this film came out. And that was literally a deranged fan that took him out.
Yes. Yeah. It was top of mind for everybody.
Yeah. I mean, you know, the Beatlemania was not something that it never died down. I mean, look at how many people are still clamoring for Paul McCartney tickets in 2024. It's something that's always been there, and with the Lennon aspect of it, and not to mention, you know, looking at the closed off aspects of Germany around this time, it could have just exacerbated some of that. And then being from over in Europe, I'm sure that it was magnified when they lived so close.
Yeah. That's a great I think you nailed it. I think this is probably using, like, at a minimum, using the fact that John Lennon is top of mind for people as a metaphor of, like, the craziness of obsession or something, right? Because the only thing, I mean, I don't want to call it a critique of the film, but, you know, are you okay if is this okay time to kind of like go into spoilers?
Yeah, let's talk about what happens perhaps before you explain that. Let's the pop star and this woman, they meet at this TV station, like I said. They go home together and they end up having sex. And she clearly wants more. He doesn't, and turns cold to her. And she says, fine, and literally chops this man up and keeps him in the fridge/freezer, turns his bones into ash, does so many crazy, heinous things. I don't even know how to explain some of this. How do you go with the third act of this film?
There's a moment where I think the turning point for her is when he says, I'll see you in a month or so.
Yeah.
You're welcome to stay here. Because he pulls away from his band and he's like, I'm choosing to spend time with this girl. See you later. And they're like, well, what about recording the album? And he's like, you got it. What about, like, if we need to contact you? He's like, I'll write you a postcard. Like, he's all in for this romantic tryst. For him, it's a tryst.
Right.
Like, he's not planning on building a life with this girl. But she, as a teenager, right? I mean, or, again, as an obsessed fan, but, I mean, whatever. I don't know exactly the delineation there, but, like, she's all in. And so when he says, I think I kind of treated my band wrong. I'm going to go back to them. I'll see you in a month or so. You're happy to stay in this house that we're in for as long as you want. She doesn't really say anything. She screams. Like, she doesn't even scream words. She just screams. It's like a guttural,
primal.
Primal. Yeah. And she takes his own award that he's won. And there's it's like a finger pointing, I guess, up to the sky or whatever. He's won an award. And she impales the back of his head. And there's like this 20-minute, I don't know how long it is, 10 minutes. But I think, I need to go back and check this. I think the death scene is equal to the sex scene.
About that, yeah.
About the same, right? Because they have this long, drawn-out, intimate sex scene, which I hated.
I've heard that before, I think.
Yeah, that she kills him, and that scene it's very Michelle Haneke in the way that it's like he just holds the camera. So this guy just holds the camera, and you can see like a million emotions running in her eyes as she kills this dude. And then she's trying to figure out, like, what now? And she slowly drags this, like, adult man through this hallway, and there's, like, blood, and she's still naked, and she's trying to figure out what to do, and she sees this freezer, and so naturally she says, okay, I'm going to chop him up and keep him in the freezer. And then they cut to a scene of her making a stew, and the foot sticking out of the stew. So she's making she's a cat now. She wants him inside of her. I think is like she wants all of him, right? So
He
she's like,
consumed her life, and now she's consuming him.
yes. And then I don't know if this is an act of trying to hide the murder or what, but it's a brilliant move for a teenager to make. She grinds the bones up so there's no trace of anything, and then slowly spreads them out, Shawshank Redemption style. And then the movie ends with her saying she hasn't had her period in 4 weeks. So she's carrying the progeny. Was that the word?
Yes.
Progeny? Sounds weird. Anyways, she's carrying this dude's kid after she's consumed him.
Right. So that is the incredibly dark ending that we get after what, again, like everybody calls this a slow burn. It's crazy because it's not really a slow burn. It's it's a tale of two films, essentially. Yeah. It is a setup, a breaking point, and then a crazy losing your mind finale. And it works very well because of that, because they have very, very specific boundaries around these tones. Yeah. They have fairly logical continuations of a story. They have somebody that is obsessed, and that obsession leads to an outcome that we're not surprised by. But it is wild.
Do you think this is a coming of age story or a story of obsession first?
Oh man, definitely obsession in my mind.
Yeah, me too.
Coming of age, it's not. I get what you're leaning at, but definitely not even there for me. The hard part is it is one of those things that you can literally choose to separate some people that understand a fandom and a fanatic are two different things, and understand that you are not entitled to those things. And again, even more so in 2024, that line might be a little more blurred for more people than ever before.
Yeah. Because I think the way that social media makes everybody feel equal, people feel like if they DM Charlie XCX, or however you pronounce that person's name, that like they're gonna respond, and like, fandom has just shifted into such this weird thing where it's like no, as people we're the same, sure, but like as a practical measure of communication, we're not the same.
Yeah, and it's maybe even made worse by those moments where these artists are genuinely people and they do interact. So if somebody might post a tweet saying, hey, I got to see Charlie XCX, and Charlie likes the tweet, something as simple as that, it could lead for some of these people to think, oh, well, since you've liked my tweet, can we meet up later for a picture before your show? And it's like, that's not really an appropriate thing to ask at this point. Let's understand that this person is living their life and simply doing their job.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's I think that's really what this film is kind of hitting hard at here, is at the end of the day, the fact that this individual was doing their job, being a part of a band. They did nothing wrong until and even then, like, sure, there was a sexual tryst that happened, but at that point, did they deserve to be killed for that? Absolutely not. This is somebody that overstepped boundaries.
Yeah. I don't know if this is a message of... I don't think it's a message of warning about, like, celebrities be careful. I think it's just a comment on obsession and, like, celebrity culture and the risk of being obsessed with this person who's very human, right? Because in this world of der fan, the fan, there, which is like reality, just like tweaked slightly, like it's like 5 degrees off of reality, the way that everybody's portrayed. Like you said, it's got a little bit of a dreamlike music video sort of quality to the whole thing. So nobody's totally acting like a real person. Maybe the band manager, maybe the mom, like, but the two leads are in this kind of hazy, dreamlike state for sure. And in that, there's a lot that can be said about the being careful as a fan not to let it consume your life, I guess.
Yeah, and honestly, especially if you go back and look through not just German, but a lot of the European films from around this time, they have some similar tonality in them, and honestly, specifically some of the German stuff you could even say is similar. Like, obviously, this comes out almost a decade later, but I could see some comparisons with Necromantic 2 slightly, if you're looking at that. And, there's so many that are very interesting. And the way that this teenager just gets completely deranged by the end of this, I could see, comparisons to something like Angst, which I love that Cult Epics put out a handful of years ago. Obviously, it's nowhere near the same story or anything like that, but this person is just, almost like a borderline animal throughout the film. And
Totally.
by the end of this movie of The Fan, she's a completely different person. And that's one of the things that's most interesting to me too, is it's so just nonchalant how she is a teenager, leaves behind her family, leaves behind all of her friends, gives up all routine, and is just completely enveloped in this other world and does not care whatsoever.
Yeah. I mean, I'm trying to remember, like, I don't know. I hate to say it like this. Please, listeners, world, forgive me if I'm being so overly simplistic. I don't know if it's quite the same for guys. Like, I'm sure there's exceptions, and forgive me for making this like a gender discussion. But I was obsessed with Monica Bellucci as a teenager. If she came and wanted to take me away, would I leave my family? And like, I don't know. I would probably just be like a terrified teenage boy who was bad with women.
Right.
I don't know. Maybe I'm oversimplifying it, but like I do think there's something about like the fact that she's this like force, and again, like she's a really strong actor, and she carries that intensity well, and it's kind of believable that she's both a teenager but also like a very old soul who's like really got a lot under the surface that she's trying to work through with this guy.
Yeah. And again, even though we alluded to it earlier, it was not on purpose to have two films where pop stars were pursued, but these could make for a very unique double feature. In one, it's a feminist study of literally chomping off dicks. And the other is the pop star being consumed by the fan. And it is such an interesting take from Mondo Macabro to put both of these out. And it shows, I think, the range of Mondo Macabro's curation over the years, that these are two of the earliest films on these two different formats that are both great movies, wildly different tones, both highly enjoyable, great discs. I truly love both of these movies. I've watched The Fan probably 3 or 4 times now since I got this original disc.
Nice.
This movie it's so weird because it's heavy and it lays on you for a while after. But it's one I've watched it with my wife a couple times. She's loved this movie every time. These are great. Highly recommend both of them.
It's not heavy like Cannibal Holocaust heavy or like Hollow heavy. Like it's not just constantly beating you over the head with like horrible things. It's just, I almost think the cannibalism and stuff is done with like a wink or something almost. It's just kind of like the whole thing. Yeah, I think you nailed it. I think the whole thing feels like a music video. So that does help with the severity of it a little bit, I think. Yeah,
and the fact that it's almost ethereal, it truly does soften it.
Yeah.
It gives it this weird, like, pillowed feeling of, this is, I mean, in a way, it's like, you're watching a fantasy, and you are until you're not.
Right. on a much more tame scale, much tamer scale, there's a cool movie from the mid-2000s with Audrey Tautou, who's another one I was obsessed with for years, called He Loves Me, He Loves Me Not. Have you ever seen that?
I don't think I have.
So the first half of the movie is her telling this beautiful love story of a guy she meets, like a meet cute, and they don't connect immediately. Then they eventually connect, and they get this romance. And the second half of the story tells the story from his perspective, and it's like this deranged stalker who he can't get rid of. And I don't mean to spoil it, but like it's a cool tonal shift, and I'm not gonna say it's a double feature, but like it certainly is in the vein of this, like, obsessed women, and like it's a twist that you don't see coming. And sorry for anybody who hasn't seen it, it's a spoiler, but I'll just give a little bit of a spoiler, just enough to kind of make it interesting, because it's one of those ones halfway through it becomes a totally different movie, and I think it's worth sitting through.
Yeah, and if we're looking for something that's not, I think you are. God, I already forgot the title of what I said earlier. I Think We're Alone Now, the documentary. If you want something that's a little more fantastical, I almost feel like this would pair really well with Misery. Again, another dark fanaticism movie, and one that puts the quote star in a really awkward, compromised situation. Yeah, and that one also could feel ethereal depending on the lens that you're looking at it. Yeah, I think there's a lot that this could go well with. It's just, again, it's a hard movie. You got the underage nudity. You've got the somber ending to this that really kind of flips you on your head. Yeah. And overall, like, this is not, the people call it a slow burn because a lot does not happen in the first half of this movie. It's very much establishing the fanatic relationship that our main character has with the pop star. So in that, it's mostly routine. It's, I mean, not to make this a film that it's not, but a lot of what you're seeing is somebody repeating the same things over and over again. You've got like a similar type of feeling to like a Jean Dielman, where it's just, hey, this person is every single day being fanaticized with a certain life until there's one thing that throws that on its head. And not that they're a perfect pairing, and not that this is as good as Jean Dielman or anything, but this is one that, I could see similar thoughts.
I don't think I think it's an apt comparison. I don't think anybody who's seen Jean Dielman would argue with that. Like, the twist in this is more severe than Jean Dielman, and it happens
slightly
way sooner.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think it's a good comparison. If you're looking for an art house double feature with The Fan,
and have a full day.
Yeah, no joke. I think in a way this is a good pairing with Jean Dielman. Good call.
Well, on that note, from The Fan to Jean Dielman, anything else that you'd like to shout out before we go into what we're going to be watching for next month?
Specifically from the film?
Yeah, sure.
No, I mean, I think we covered it. Look, it's a movie that rewards seeing it to the end.
Yeah.
And I think it goes from being like, okay, this is kind of an interesting take on obsession, to like, holy shit. And it goes there pretty fast.
Completely. So,
there's a movie that I want to rep or mention here that came out a few years back called Censor. Have you seen that?
Yeah.
It has a equal style of like death kind of in it, and like I think it's certainly not about obsession, but I do think it's an interesting movie that looks at a topic you wouldn't expect to see in like a murder film or like a hyper violent film, and then it goes to places that you probably wouldn't expect. I don't know what the general consensus is of Censor, but I thought it was awesome. I liked it a lot.
It's also a very European film, and also very focused on capitalism, just like The Fan.
True. True.
All right. So for the month of October, we're going to be coming back on October 15th-ish, somewhere around the middle of the month, to discuss these next two films. Chris, what are you going to suggest that we watch?
I was going back and forth. I mean, Mondo, Macabro, and horror, like, we can do a lot, right?
Right.
I think as we're representing Mondo Macabro as like the official podcast, the thing that I was most excited about recently that they put out was the Bollywood Horror Set. Briefly gonna detour and talk about a release that's not Mondo. Mahakal is a really cool film where it's like a combination of like Freddy Krueger and like a musical and Bollywood and like all sorts of things. And the fact that there's, what is it, 8 or 10 of these in a set is,
6.
and they're all better than Mahakal, is
Yeah.
just amazing. So I think it would be fun to talk about Virana, Vengeance of the Vampire.
That's a great pick. All right, so you're going to go with Virana. I'm going to go with Purana Mandir. This is the Haunted Temple. Everybody that has been thinking about it, if you are listening to this right now, quite a few people have been targeted on Amazon with a 30% off coupon for this. So if you haven't checked Amazon for the Bollywood box set in quite some time, it's already fairly cheap. And then 30% off gets it down to like $70 or $65, something like that. It is a very great purchase on that. I normally don't suggest Amazon, but that's super cheap for what is literally one of my favorite box sets from the last few years.
Yeah, and shout out to Chris Stashew here, but like Indian cinema is way underrepresented.
Yeah, 100%.
And like I think everybody generally knows about Bollywood. That's not going to be like a shock to anybody. But they produce way more movies even than Hollywood. And the fact that, we're not having a boutique company specializing in Indian cinema is super interesting. So
yeah,
these horror movies, I mean, it's, you're catching like a weird corner of Indian cinema, which is kind of cool anyways, but they're all super entertaining. So Virana, and you said, what was the other one?
The other one is Purana Mandir, the Haunted Temple.
Yeah, great.
The limited edition box still available on the Mondo website if you've not picked it up. Available from quite a few other retailers as well. It's been up there for a bit now, and I know it was not a super hot seller, and I think Mondo even came out and said we probably won't be able to do any of these box sets because of how poorly this did. But I think this should be selling out at this point. Like there is so much great things to discover in this box set. The book that came with it is fantastic. Tim Paxton did a lot of the extras for this, and he is a passionate, voracious defender of Indian cinema. He's incredible. So yeah, you shout out Chris Stashew. I'm going to shout out Tim Paxton and Josh Hurtado, who is a critic. All these people that are doing things that are keeping Indian cinema alive for the West that pays literally no attention unless there's suddenly a hot commodity like RRR.
Right.
These are worth watching. They're fun, they're entertaining, they're a blast, and completely something that should be on every collector's shelf.
That's cool. Well, we'll do our part. This is a box set that should have been gone right away. Like, that's crazy to me that this isn't sold out already.
Yeah. It does say on their website less than 500 remain.
Like, let's prove that Indian cinema has interest here, because there is some incredible stuff. There was I live in Austin, right? And there's a society here that tries to promote independent movies coming out of India that are outside of the studio system. Some of the documentaries I've seen at these festivals are like, I mean, they would win Academy Awards. Like, they're great.
Yeah.
And for whatever reason, they're not, maybe because they're not part of the studio system, but they're not being promoted. But there's one about rat killers where they literally, it's like a 90-minute documentary or whatever, 80-minute documentary about this group of people in Mumbai that go out every night, and it's an army of people, like hundreds of people that go out and kill rats all night long, and they get paid per rat. Sad for rat lovers of the world, but it's a complete infestation. Like, they're taking over the city. They've done this every night. It's a government job, so you get pension and you get everything. It's a government job. They've done this every night for like 40 years, and they still can't contain like the rat population in Mumbai.
That's wild.
Yeah. And like stuff like that, there's just human interest stories coming out of India are just, can you imagine 2 billion people, the human interest stories that are coming out of there from people with like a creative lens and an eye for telling a story? Like, there's some really cool stuff coming out of that country. So anyways, I want to do my small part. Let's sell this box set out and get other labels to experiment with it.
Yeah, I think if you have not seen any of them, I understand that it's 6 films and the price tag's probably a little intimidating, but especially if you buy it on Amazon with that discount, possibly, it is well worth it. And with 6 movies, you're guaranteed to like 1 or 2 of them at the very least. They're all great. This is definitely one of my favorites, like I said, from the last couple of years.
Or buy it in the sale. What's it going to be in the sale?
Yeah. That's a great point. Not sure exactly what the price was last time.
Yeah. $50 or something in the sale, 40, 50
It'll probably be like 75, something like that.
All right, fine. But still, buy it in the sale. Let's sell it out.
Fully agreed. Thank you for listening to this second episode of Wildside. Like we said earlier, the 3rd episode will come out in the middle of October. We'll be talking about a couple titles from the Bollywood Horror Box Set. If you are interested in checking out the 2 films that we watched today, I'll put some links to the Mondo Macabro website and Amazon in the description below if you want to get those discs in now. But other than that, check out The Fan, check out Lady Terminator, and listen to some of our other shows. What do you do in your other free time there, Chris?
You know, I feel like there's a lot of, so my day job is They Live by Film. We're about 160 episodes in. Love Adam, love Zach, and it's a combination of a film discussion podcast and then an interview podcast where there's some really good interviews on there that I'm really proud of. We interview the boutique Blu-ray community, filmmakers. There's going to be some podcasters coming out that I've intentionally sought out as like really powerful voices in the field. And that's been something that's been really fun to do. But I got to say, I'm really enjoying Punk Vacation because it's a Vinegar Syndrome focused podcast. And from the beginning, I wanted to make it a community. And it's only 4 episodes in, and I've already got Celeste de la Cabra to come on and talk about the porn titles. And that first episode, I don't know exactly when this is going to drop, but that episode where Celeste joins will already be out, which is great. And she's great. And she talks to Justin La Liberty, which is great. And like, I'm going to bring in employees of Vinegar Syndrome, people that are very engaged with Vinegar Syndrome, like Trash Mex is going to come in and do an episode in October where we walk through all the Mexican titles that Vinegar Syndrome's done. And honestly, I'm going to the Vinegar Syndrome Discord and pulling in people that are just passionate about the label. And the first one's going to drop October 1st. It's going to be just a super fan. They've seen a bunch of stuff. We're going to talk through their favorites. We're going to talk through Halloween favorites of October. And so I'm going to try to, I don't know the employee who's coming in October 1st yet. It's going to be one of 3 people. Hopefully, I'm crossing fingers it's Oscar, but it's going to be one of 3 people. And it's going to be somebody from the Vinegar Syndrome Discord coming in after that to just have a fun conversation about this label they love. So I'm really trying to build a community, and it kind of feels like it's coming together, and I'm very excited about that. Sorry for the long-winded answer, Ryan. What about you? Can you do your answer in under 3 minutes?
I absolutely can, but I will say Oscar is one of the most sweetest people in the world, and I can't wait to hear that discussion.
Good.
I do a lot. I am found everywhere else under the name The Disconnected. I've got a live show every Thursday night that goes over all the physical media announcements for the week. I bring on a guest, and we react to those, discuss those, and then have some sort of film discussion afterwards. And I put out a magazine called The Physical Media Advocates with a handful of other creators from around the world that I think is great, and I hope that you like it as well. But that's a story for another time. We'll talk about that in the future. Everything else, check out the other shows on the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network. There's a link for that in the description below.
I just want to quickly say, like, if anybody has a title from like the catalog that they would love for us to discuss, Mondo Macabro has so many batshit crazy, wild, movies that have unexpected endings or are crazy from the beginning or are from corners of the world that no one else is covering. Like, I would love to hear from one of the literally hundreds of people that have listened to the first episode. Again, thank you so much for that. Like, I would love to hear from y'all and say, like, hey, can you please cover like this or whatever? And I mean, Ryan, I don't know. I mean, I'm kind of putting you on the spot, but we'll do it, right?
Yeah, of course. I think that is an aspect of this that could be really fun. I know that there are a lot of people that have maybe been trepidatious about some titles. For example, and not to press my fingers on the scale at all, I know a lot of people are intimidated by something like Sillip. You could get our reaction to it and see what we think about it. Hell, we might even be able to bring Jared on and discuss them. There's a lot of reasons why some of these movies are important to Mondo Macabro.
Yeah.
And they're important to a lot of the people that have followed Mondo Macabro for a long time, because many of these titles have gotten a DVD release and then a Blu-ray release, or many of these have, a lasting legacy. Like, Lady Terminator and The Fan are both kind of in that league, and something like Alucarda. Maybe you've never had a chance to watch it, and it's got Alucarda has like an intense reputation at this point. People are massive fans of it, and if you want to hear us discuss why it's important or why we like it or why we don't, who knows what we're going to talk about, we would be thrilled to hear that. So let us know in the comment sections where you're listening to this.
There is a canon of Mondo Macabro films that we would love to discuss. And I think that the craziest thing to me is that there's stuff that they're putting out on Blu-ray that was literally in the Mondo Macabro book like 30 years ago.
Yeah.
That they're finally getting to realize on Blu-ray. And like, that's so cool. Like, this is Pete and now Jared's like brain child and like baby. And like, they've nursed it along all these years, right? It's so cool. I love it. So really excited to be a part of this, and just want to make it good. So
I hear that, and that means that it's time to call it a night. And until next time, hope you check out a film from Mondo Macabro. We'll see you in October.
Bye.
The audio commentary. It's a dying art form, but here at One Track Mind, I, your wonky yet affable host Ryan Luis Rodriguez, analyze film through the prism of these embryonic forms of podcasting, one audio commentary at a time. Masterpieces, crapster pieces, live action, animation, cult classics, films literally no one has ever heard of. No track is too small, and no track is too big. Join me and my guests from the entertainment world as we keep these features alive every other Tuesday. Hey, who else is going to discuss Bill and Ted's Bogus Journey one week and Citizen Kane the next? Us, that's who. Sure, you have to put up with my voice, but there's a certain give and take in this industry. That's One Track Mind, part of the Someone's Favorite Productions family, and available wherever you get your podcasts.
Thank you for listening. To hear more shows from the Someone's Favorite Productions podcast network, please select the link in the description